Keys to the Commonwealth, a podcast where we share the real stories of local community members who are using real estate to build personal wealth, along with tips and tricks from professionals across the industry. And now, your host, Landry Fields.
Welcome back, everyone, to another Keys to the Commonwealth podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Nova Insurance, where we love people through insurance, whether it's your business, real estate portfolio, home, auto, or life. We work as independent risk advisors to find the best coverage and options that suit your unique needs. As an insurance advisor, I love working with real estate investors for sure, and that's definitely what got me into the business in some sense. Very excited for today's guest. He is the founder of Caden Properties and is a seasoned real estate investor of 22 years. And says his biggest accomplishment is his wife and him retiring in their 40s because of real estate investing. Born and raised right here in Lexington, he received his degree from Eastern Kentucky University, currently dwells in Georgetown, and is married to his beautiful bride, Dewanna, and together have a beautiful daughter, Lauren, and two dogs, Finn and Stella. I'm pleased to welcome Joe Marcum today to the Keys to the Commonwealth studio. Joe, thanks for coming on the show.
Landry, thanks for having me on here. I'm
Absolutely.
glad to be here.
See you on the message boards a lot. I know we've been Facebook friends for a little bit, and so you start realizing you have a lot of Facebook friends that you're not really friends with. I was like, we need to get Joe on here so we can kind of know each other a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a pretty active member on the Bluegrass Real Estate Investors Group because I've got a lot of time on my hands now.
Yeah,
so.
And that's been such a great group, especially for people that are newer and that have, where there's people like you that are giving back or are willing to kind of give back in some respects to us newer investors for sure. So that's been great. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that's I'm trying to do is give back because, 20 years ago when we started this, there was no podcast.
Right.
There was no, real estate investing groups. It was Carlton Sheets, no money down. Here's how you buy with other people's money. Infomercials, Send me $5,000 and I'll send you some VHS tapes kind of thing. So.
Oh, yeah. The whole buying my curriculum or a video series on a TV ad or something.
Right, yeah. Those who can't do teach,
right.
And that was what they were doing. They weren't investing, they were selling courses. So.
Well, they still do that on YouTube and other things like that. But, no, so hop back in the DeLorean and kind of tell us about how you got into real estate investing and what got you in there.
Good deal. Yeah, I was working at Lexmark. I went there right out of college. My degree's in police administration. Like I said, I was waiting for a hiring cycle to get on at Lexington Metro, and despite people telling me not to do that, to change my major and get something useful instead of something useless, that was some pretty solid advice that I just ignored and didn't take. But I had a roommate at the time who was working at Lexmark who got me hired on because it was a pretty decent wage versus working at, the Speedway until...
This was like the height of the Lexmark,
Yeah, it was early 2000s. So I graduated college in 98 and started at Lexmark basically the fall of 98, and spent about 6 years there in some various roles. I was a technical support call center, setting people's printers up that were calling in having problems or fixing issues, and then got promoted and became what they called a systems engineer or a sales engineer, depending on who you talk to.
Sure.
But it was basically a technical lead on a sales team that would go out and do dog and pony presentations in front of customers. And the sales guy would say, yeah, we can do that. And then it would be up to me to figure out, here's how we have to build that out. Here's how many servers you need. Here's how many printers you're going to need. Here's where they're going to be positioned in your offices. So I did that for about a year. And then I got tapped on the shoulder as part of the first layoff at Lexmark, which was about 2 weeks before Christmas.
Was it?
And about a week and a half before we were supposed to close on our first house as a refinance to get everything set up as on a permanent 30-year mortgage. So it was quite a shock.
Wow.
We didn't plan on that, and it's not something we ever, we thought we would both be retiring at Lexmark, but that's not the way the world was working, and it's definitely not the way the world works now. Nobody spends 15, 20, 30 years at a company and retires.
Yeah.
So that was kind of disheartening. So my position was eliminated, was the technical term for it. It wasn't a layoff, which I argued with the people about. But they eliminated the position. I found another position inside Lexmark and spent about a year and a half there on their web publications team, writing articles and knowledge-based articles, that kind of stuff. Because I'd been doing it for 5 years at that point, so we knew printing inside and out. But we decided, it was my friend at the time who eventually became my girlfriend and is now my wife, that, we in the mix had gotten together, and she had always been interested in trying to find a way forward. And at that time, I was definitely like, I can't let a company have this power over me again.
Right.
So that was just eye-opening to think that, I went from having a great salary and a bright future to somebody saying, we no longer need your services, pack your box here, see you later, good luck. So.
Yeah, not being able to be in control of your own destiny.
Right.
It's probably a trend, I'm sure, between all real estate investors in some respects where they're like, oh, I need some control here.
Absolutely. So we talked about different types of investing, and she had always been interested in real estate, but she is a very risk-adverse person.
Okay.
So she's kind of the, when you look at the, she was a squirrel that would put her nuts away, and she had all these savings accounts, and it's like, hey, I made $100 and I spent $100, and it's like,
right.
So we just kind of had, it's like, I've been poor and I'm used to being poor, so that's kind of what you do, right? It's like you make sure your bills are covered. That's a win. You get that month and you put the check mark and don't owe anybody anything, and you don't have anything in the bank.
Yeah.
She was the exact opposite. She saved every penny she scrimped, and she had, a much better financial head at the time. But she did not want to risk any of that money. That was her.
Right.
Her power was basically, if that happens to her, I can make it. Mm-hmm. I have a nest egg. I have some fallback plan. My plan was, I guess I'll find another job and somebody else will have to pay me, right?
Right.
So we talked about it, and we were, dating, and then eventually got married. But while we were still dating, my mom got sick, and it was obvious that she was not going to be able to come back home to the house that we had grown up in. My parents had bought it in 1957 over in Castlewood. And we lived there, and it had fallen down around my mother in the last 5 or 10 years. It needed a roof. The tub was in the crawl space because the floor joist had rotted out, and it was just in rough shape. So she was going to actually lose it to a bankruptcy settlement foreclosure from medical bills because she had been sick and had open heart surgery and had a bunch of issues, and they were going to foreclose and take the house and attempt to sell it to pay off some of her debt.
So this was your first one.
So this was not is our first house. We didn't intend it to be our first investment house.
Right.
So we were buying it with the idea that we're going to go in here and fix it up, and then we're going to live there. Because at the time, I had a roommate that I'd lived with in college that had gotten me the job at Lexmark, and she was living at home with her parents still.
Okay.
So saving money because that's the type of person she was, right? So she didn't want to go spend $500 or $600 on an apartment when she still had a bedroom that she'd been in since 1975.
Oh gosh,
So that's where we were, and I came forward to her with the proposition for an opportunity because I knew that she had been interested in buying houses, and we'd actually looked at a house previously as a purchase for her because she had the means to purchase the house. And then I was going to rent a room from her as a roommate, kind of the house hacking,
right.
In the early 2000s, late 90s. So we were kind of talking about that, and then I went to her and said, I have maybe an opportunity. I know you're interested in real estate. I don't know anything about real estate, but I trust you, and I think that you do. So if you're interested, we can go look at this and see. There may be an opportunity here, but I don't know anything about it. You just have to tell me because I didn't own power tools. I was never a Mr. Fix-It guy.
Okay.
I was not that guy in high school. I was not that guy in college. It was not me at all.
Still not that guy?
Unfortunately, I am that guy.
Okay,
So I'm kind of the jack of all trades, master of none at this point. But it took 20 years to,
I could interrupt that actually because I heard that the other day, and I don't know if it's true, but I've heard that the real thing is jack of all trades, but master of none is still better than a master of one.
Yes, that is the.
And I thought that was great. I somehow missed that most of my life. So
it often gets chopped off.
I think that's a great saying, and that usually is intended more for a negative way sometimes. Sorry, I had to get out there because I was just talking to my wife about that last week.
Absolutely. So we went and looked at the house, and it was in really bad shape. And she saw opportunity. And, and I agreed with her and said, you know what? I think you're right about this. I don't know much about it, but let's do this. I trust you. You know? And then we had to figure out how to make it happen.
Right.
Because we were both working hourly jobs. She had a few $1,000s. I had a few $100s and an opportunity.
And at this point, you weren't necessarily thinking we're going to turn this into our career at this point.
It was somewhere we were dating now, and it's like somewhere we can live together. Yeah. And if it works out, then awesome. We'll get married.
I'm not sure a lot of real estate investors think I'm going to go into this full time necessarily. Right. I think a lot of the time the opportunity just presents itself and becomes more viable for sure.
That's absolutely what happened is like I said, I saw the opportunity possibility and she saw the actual reality of, this is something we could do. And her dad was, they're from Eastern Kentucky. So she's basically
what part?
She's from Breathitt County.
Okay.
It's actually Watts, Lost Creek area that just got really hit hard with the floods. So we've made 3 trips down there with donations. And
I've heard it's worse than you can kind of imagine in some respects.
It is absolutely devastating. We went down 2 weeks ago and took some pictures because the first time we went down, you couldn't even the roads were still shut down. All of the infrastructure was still torn up. And so her uncle, we went down and made a drop a couple weeks ago, and then he took us around to some of the places, and it is absolutely heartbreaking, the devastation that's there. We took some pictures, and you don't just see it in the pictures. You don't get a scale of it, And
I'm involved with a lot of ministry groups and stuff like that, which we're trying to really impact that. It's from what I've heard too, it's going to be a very similar scenario probably to Katrina, as far as more or less the relocation of people probably never going back or permanently moving away type of scenario. Is that what you saw or see?
We see that, and it's going to be a little bit different because Katrina hit a lot of people that didn't own the properties necessarily.
Okay, that's a good point.
And in Eastern Kentucky, it's a lot of family-run land.
Yeah.
So
passed
somebody,
over generations.
So literally,
like that.
One of her uncles lived in the house that they built for her grandmother after she passed. Well, he was still living in that house, and the same thing just happened. So they'll have call them hollers. Yep. They'll have a holler. There'll be a flat spot, and there'll be 3 or 4 or 5 houses, and it's multi-generational living.
So the idea of picking up and moving is
picking up and moving. Where do they go? That's kind of the thing is, what they had grandma's house, or they had, grandma's trailer, or
history of your family's tied to 100 years of that location.
So that was the devastating part for her, was that we went to the road down to their holler they lived in was named for her grandfather.
Oh, wow.
And it's kind of like, and you go down there and it's like, well, there was grandma's house, which had never seen floodwaters, literally picked up off its foundation and was 200 yards down and smashed into her aunt's house, which knocked off the foundation as well. And so there were 5 of them in that, 5 houses there that were all totally destroyed. And it's just, you don't get it. Like when you go there and you look, and it's like you see the pictures or you see the video, the drone flyovers, but you stand there and you look, and there are buckets and toilet paper and 20 feet up in the tree line. Or you're driving down the road and you look up and you can see the high water mark for the mud line on the hill over there, and it's 20 or 30 feet, and you think 3 days ago this would have been 30 feet underwater.
Right.
And then it's not just water, it's septic systems, sewage plant, that kind of thing. The people that there was a large truck repair shop that had those 275-gallon totes of diesel fuel and motor oil, and all of that stuff is all just, it's absolutely, the scale of it is I've seen tornado damaged areas, and it's, there's a swath, it might be a half mile or maybe a mile wide. But when you drive, and it's like we're 4 counties into Eastern Kentucky, and the entire 4, 5, 6, 7 county wide area is just devastated. So anyway, that's something
that is
another
conversation for sure.
That it's going to be. And it's one of those things where, you think you can rebuild a house. Well, like you said, this is something that you can't just go put a house back, because now it's in a flood zone. And houses that have been there for 50 years and never seen water.
To that point, actually, I mean, again, I don't want to go too far on this, but for the gravity of what's happening, I think I just heard FEMA just condemned an entire town or 2 in that area that potentially, we're talking maybe towns that never come back ever again.
Yeah, and they're gone,
And we got schools that are trying to figure out how they're even going to open or when they're going to even open type of thing. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that's the other thing is that, FEMA gets attention for riding to the rescue, but then they'll go into somewhere that says, there were 5 houses there that had 5 families living in them. One of them got an offer for $7,000. Was the FEMA offer, and you can't replace a house for $7,000.
Yeah,
they have,
and then a lot of times you have to pay FEMA back. So as well. I don't think people realize that.
It's just crazy. I don't know how it's all going to play out. Mm-hmm. It's just so disheartening to think about. So luckily we had no deaths in the family.
Okay,
but she did have multiple, an aunt and a different uncle, both lost everything. Literally, her uncle had to bust a window out, grab his dogs, swim to high ground, because at the end, the water was within a foot of the tip of the roof of the house he was in.
Wow.
So, and then as he's swimming, both of his dogs end up getting bitten by snakes. And
oh, gosh.
He said it was absolutely so. The next morning, one of the dogs comes out and his face is just eaten up with copperhead snake bites, which is something else you never really consider is that you're not the only people and animals trying to get out of these floodwaters. So he had to swim through God knows what. His dogs had to swim through it, and he's like, I was thankful that they had a big wheelie trash can that he stayed in the night because he was worried about the water coming up and snakes coming up. So he literally couldn't get out. They were flooded and trapped in the holler. And his daughter actually had to borrow kayaks. She was further up on the next mountainside. And she borrowed a friend's kayak next door and kayaked over and got him the next morning. So yeah, it's been just unbelievable, the scope and tragedies that are going on down there. And it's not something that 2 months from now, everything's going to be different and better. It's going to be years before they, recover. If they do recover there, like you said, a lot of people are just going to say, wash their hands of it and move. So anyway,
sorry. But those are real subjects that need to be discussed in realities of this for sure. So I didn't want to just gloss over that by any means.
Right. And then the other side of that, like I said, FEMA gets accolades and credit for coming in, and then people are saying, what about flood insurance? Well, as an insurance provider, flood insurance is not something that if you can even get is cheap. And
no, it's usually 4 or 5 times. If you're in flood zones, you're usually paying 4 or 5 times the amount for a flood policy that doesn't really truly cover your entire property or house most of the time anyway, for 4 or 5 times the price of just your home insurance alone.
And then you get to the flip side of that is, like I said, a lot of these are multi-generational homes and they may not even have mortgages on them. So they may not even have insurance.
Exactly.
So those are things that the gaps that you see when you stop and think about the individuals that are affected, that's definitely something that kind of gets looked over.
Oh, yeah.
So, and these people.
I don't know if I mentioned it. I think I mentioned it before. I've spent some time in Powell County, Kentucky, which I would consider, I guess, the edge of Eastern Kentucky in many regards. So, I won't go as far as to say I'm from Eastern Kentucky, because I feel like there's a lot of people in Eastern Kentucky that probably don't even consider Powell County maybe Eastern Kentucky, but even though it's the edge type of thing. But it definitely, I'm not to the extent of like Breathitt County, like you were talking about, or so forth. But back to the years aspect in that sense, though, that leads me into more or less, what was that transition like, kind of growing, or how'd you, as far as how quickly did you kind of grow from scale, or kind of get that itch, or roll into retiring in their 40s?
Yeah. So that first house we bought, we worked on for almost 3 years, about 2.5 years, because it was in such bad shape. Yeah. And we actually went to get an appraisal done to see it. Like I said, we were still trying to evaluate whether or not it made sense, and we agreed, it makes sense to pursue. And we knew the number that we had to hit was $13,000, and we didn't have that in cash because, like I said, we're hourly employees, and we just didn't have that kind of money sitting around. But she had a Cavalier, a 1996 Chevy Cavalier that she owned free and clear, that we were able to get a signature loan at her bank that she'd banked at since she was, 13 years old or whatever. Okay. So they were willing to extend that courtesy and credit line to get us the $13,000 to buy the house. So the first thing we did was we put a roof on the house. And then we started repairing it because the roof was shot, and it was, if you can't dry it in, you can't, whatever you do is going to get ruined. So we went out and did that. And
that's why, just if you haven't figured out, us insurance guys, that's pretty much always our first question is, how old is the roof?
How old is the roof? Absolutely.
And you need to keep track of your rental properties. Just that'll make it much easier when you're having to deal with insurance stuff.
Yep, absolutely. So we did that, and then, we made the decision we're going to buy it, and we started the work on it, and then we were going to live in it. It was never intended to be a rental property. It was going to be our personal home. And it was basically, it's a Cape Cod style story and a half. So it only has I'm 6'5", and it had 2 bedrooms upstairs that my dad and my uncles had finished out in the early 60s when we were having, they were having kids. I'm the youngest of 8. Okay. So it was a full house for, 50 years. So, but the upstairs bedrooms are only have 6-foot clearance in the middle, and they go down to knee walls that are about 3.5 or 4 feet tall. So we decided we would work on it, live there, and then laid off. So this whole mess all was happening simultaneously. Oh man! So it's everything comes in bunches. It's like coasting, and then the whole world blows up, and it's kind of like, how do you deal with what can we do? And so I had been in my job at Lexmark, the second job. Third job technically, doing the web creation for a little over a year and a half, and I started getting antsy and wanted to move on to another company. And one of my friends from high school said, "Oh, I've got a place in Georgetown I'm working at. I think you'll love that. Would be a great fit for you. It's IT based, support based, and it pays a lot more than you're making, at Lexmark." So I went down and interviewed for that and took that job. in Georgetown, and my wife is actually from Georgetown. So her parents moved from Eastern Kentucky and settled in Georgetown. And it was an easy sell for her to come back home to Georgetown because she was familiar with the area. And
Yeah.
so I was like, okay, well, I'm working in Georgetown now. She was still working at Lexmark.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, let's move to Georgetown. We'll find a house in Georgetown. That's
Kind of, I guess, at the cusp of when Georgetown really
it exploded. Toyota
starting to kind of really grow.
Yeah, Toyota came in. We were, probably 4 or 5, 6 years after Toyota had been established and was, making Georgetown.
About to what's going to happen to E-Town.
Yeah, absolutely. So we found a fixer-upper in Georgetown that was in a great neighborhood. It's kind of like a Chenaway area, if you're familiar with Lexington. Oh, yeah. It's older brick ranches built in the 60s on basically 1/2 to 3/4 of an acre yards with mature trees.
Yep.
The same family had owned it since the 60s. It'd been a one-owner house, and the last of that line had passed away. And the house had sat for probate. And they had a bunch of indirect heirs. There were like 13 heirs in 10 different states.
Oh, goodness.
Everything had to be signed. There was no dot loop. There was no electronic signatures. Everything had to be wet signed and FedExed and wet signed and FedExed. And it was a nightmare of closing. So we actually got through that, closed on that house, and we were trying to figure out what to do with the house in Lexington, if we should sell it, because we could have made $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 on that and rolled it forward onto the new house because it needed repairs, and there was a lot of things we wanted to do because it was literally the original 1967 carpet, horsehair pad underneath it, central air in the 60s, which was crazy, but the unit was literally the size of a Volkswagen bus, and it didn't function very well, and it had baseboard radiant water heaters based off a boiler. So there was a lot of upgrades that needed to happen. So we were
ironically, I feel like people don't realize they still exist. Like I've walked into some houses with like those boiler systems, and you're like, I didn't realize these were still around.
Yeah, they're very efficient, and when you go out, like it's kind of weird because like if you go to New York or you go up somewhere north, those systems are very efficient at heating, but nobody wants to use them because they're very cantankerous and they're very expensive to fix. And so that was what our first decision was. We're putting a straight up just HVAC in here, and we're not fooling with this boiler stuff. So. But so we were trying to figure it out, and we're kind of like, going back and forth. And then she's like, well, let's just rent it and we'll see what happens. And we'll give it a few months. Worst case scenario, we way over improved the house because we were living there. It was our house. Yeah. So we tore down walls. We put in custom hickory cabinets and tile that we did ourselves. And we way over improved this, house that we bought for $13,000. And when we had the first appraisal done right after we bought it, the appraiser told us it was a detriment to the lot. We should bulldoze it and start over. That the lot was worth $15,000 without the house. So that was the kind of shape it was in. It was pretty rough. And, So we took that under advisement and then spent 2.5 years fixing,
that was before you did that.
That was before. Okay. So when we very first purchased
we
wanted to see what are we getting into here.
Okay.
That was kind of the disheartening, oh my gosh, are we making a huge mistake kind of moment. And it turned out to not be a mistake.
I'll be honest. I think that's a trend between everybody I've talked to in real estate as far as that first one. You're like, did I just make the worst decision of my life kind of a thing?
Absolutely.
Everyone will have that question, it just seems like, when you buy your first rental property.
Yeah. And that's the thing is it's hard because we didn't know. You don't know what you don't know. Like I said, literally, once we bought the house, I didn't own a circular saw. Right. I didn't own a jigsaw. I didn't have a hammer or a tool bag, literally, So,
or may not even known what those were.
Right. And so that was the Eastern Kentucky tie was her dad was someone who was, once again, the master of none, jack of all trades. Yeah. And so he'd said, I've done this, we've done this, I've worked construction, I'll help you guys. And so he did. He came over and he jumped in and said, here's how you frame a wall. Yeah. We'll lay the block. We'll build an addition. And it's like, I don't know anything about concrete blocks or forms and footers. And he's like, yeah, we'll figure it. He's like, this is what you need. We got to be this deep. We got to be below the frost line. You got to have rebar. And I didn't like, okay, awesome. Let's do this. So he really, pitched in and helped. And we were doing this ourselves, on the nights and weekends. And we didn't have money. Like I said, we spent the money we had to buy the house. So we would literally get our paychecks, on bi-weekly paychecks. And we'd pay our bills and go and say, oh, we've got $160. What can we do? Yep. It's like,
what's the next piece of the puzzle?
We can buy a toilet. So we would go buy the toilet and we would sit it in the room where the bathroom was going to be. And then 2 weeks later, it's like, oh, we've got $200. That's probably enough to get backer board and tile. So we would go buy $200 worth of backer board and tile and sit them in the bathroom. And so we did that literally over the course of about 2.5 years.
Wow. Before
we spent the first night in the house. And so we're
working. Oh, wow. Oh, really?
Yeah. So we were living, she was living with her parents at the time. And then I had a roommate. And then I actually moved in with her dad and her and lived with them for about a year before we got the house sorted out. And then we get it sorted out, and I get antsy and decide, I want to look for another job, and we're going to do this, and go to Georgetown for more money. And it's like, oh, we're making more money. And then we're trying to figure out what to do with the house. Now we've spent all this time and effort and money, and we've lived there for probably 2 years maybe, and we've worked on it for about 2.5 years. And she's like, I can't believe, we were finally getting to just doing the landscaping. We put flower beds in the front yard, and had got the back deck finished and stained. And, and then it was like, okay, let's move, Yeah. And so, that, like I said, the discussion was, do we sell it, cash out, take the money, roll it forward? Do we just keep it as a rental? So we kept it as a rental.
Okay.
And we listed put a sign in the yard with a little clear plastic bucket with flyers on it, because there was no internet advertising really. Craigslist was around, but nobody was really using it. Yeah. So we did that, and I had like 14 calls the next day. My cell phone just blew up at work to the point where my boss was like, what the hell's going on with your cell phone? Turn it off, because I was taking phone calls all day long. And it's like, every 15 minutes, my phone rings. So I literally had to turn my phone off. And we interviewed people, had never done any tenant background selections or any of that. It was just kind of a gut feel.
Yeah.
And we moved some people in there, and they were decent people. They stayed for about, the first year. We had zero issues, and we were cash flowing around $500 a month above our mortgage payment. And it was like, I was only making like $40,000 a year, and it was like, we just made $6,000 on one house.
Yeah.
And it's like, so then you start thinking, it's like,
it's always that first one. You're like,
yeah, it was like,
wait a minute.
And like I said, your numbers are kind of fudgy in the beginning because we didn't know. There was no calculators. There was no, you got to figure vacancies, your CapEx, your repair budgets, all that. We didn't know anything about any of that. It was like, I just got a check for $850. My mortgage payment's $347. Woohoo, So that was kind of the way that, the first house was like, it's like the first hit, and it was like, I'm hooked now.
Yeah. And you're like looking around, you're like, wait, this is totally legal.
Yeah.
Right? You're like, okay.
So we did that, and it was like, wow, this is going pretty well,
Yeah.
And then so we were a year into that first rental, and it was like, okay, we had a car payment. We bought a car, and or it was actually a Tribute. It was a SUV. We paid it off, and it had around a little over a $500 a month car payment. And it just immediately, that pooped off the bottom line budget. And it's like, well, we're making another $500 a monch now. Can we buy something in Lexington for $500 a month? Mm-hmm. So we went out to one of the mortgage calculators and punched in, $500 principal, what do we have? And it ended up being about $65,000 was what we could buy and still keep a payment around $500 a month.
Okay.
So then we knew the market in Lexington was going to be $800, $900, $1,000, depending on the neighborhood and the house, was what it would rent for. So we went and looked and tried to find a nicer neighborhood, because at the time when we bought in over at Castlewood, I'd lived there my entire life. I was comfortable there, but it wasn't a very good neighborhood. It was where people lived and worked, and people had lived there forever.
Yeah.
But it wasn't somewhere where people wanted to live. That didn't come until much later when the area started the gentrification. So that was, so we looked around and we wanted to be in a better neighborhood. And Meadowthorpe in Lexington was where our first real, true investment, this is going to be an investment property, is going to be. And we found one that we paid $62,000 for. And it was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. It looked like a brick ranch from the outside, but it was actually an old shotgun house that someone had added onto 3 times and then bricked the whole thing.
Wow.
So it was one of the original houses on the farm that Meadowthorpe came out of.
Okay.
And it's on the very backside next to the park.
Yeah.
And it was a dog of a house. It had a fire. It had all of these weird like subfloors and systems under it that were just like, we've got, locust columns in the original part of the house. That's how old it was. It wasn't even, it was true 2x4, 2x8 lumber. It was 110 or 120 years old. And then somebody built an addition and they put a bathroom on it. And then somebody built an addition and they put a dining room.
So was the
in
internal
kitchen.
layout like really odd?
It's really weird, and it's got about 7 foot tall ceilings in it, but we could afford it, and it was in a good neighborhood. So that was one of the things was we want to buy in better neighborhoods because we think we'll get more rent, you know. Yeah. So that was kind of, and we were doing the work ourselves. We couldn't afford to have people do the work. So where there had been a fire previously, the floor structure was shot. Somebody had jacklegged it, you know, patched it literally with pop bottles and bricks as supporting members of the foundation. So I went in with a cart jack because I'm that guy, you know, and a bottle jack. We literally drug a floor jack under there and jacked the floor up and put in support columns and posts that were, you know, able to support the structure. So we worked on it and got it rented, and it was cash flowing around $350 a month. So that's when we went from 1 to 2.
I mean, at this point, I feel like the numbers today, I'm like, I'm good if we're $250 a door, you know, so it's definitely, you know, been squeezed, and honestly, it's been squeezed more. So
it's the time, the way we looked at it was we were still able to we actually financed that house with 100% financing. So we literally had no money in the deal. We had an 80-20 loan on it, which not even an option now. Banks want skin in the game kind of thing. So we were buying in a good time. Like the rates were still like our first house in Highland Park. We still have the mortgage on it. We've got, I think, 7 years left on it, but it's sub 4%. It was at like 3.5%, I think. Yeah. And then the same thing on Larch. When we weren't making progress or buying a house actively, we would focus money back down on whatever loan we had open at the time.
Gotcha.
So we did that. We got Larch under our belts, got it closed up and rented, and then found a duplex in Winburn, which if you know anything about Winburn and Lexington, it's a sketchy neighborhood. It's always been a sketchy neighborhood since they built it. It was developed in the late 60s, early 70s for low-income housing. It's high density. It's got a bunch of apartment complexes in the front that are really sketchy. But there's neighborhoods in the back, streets in the back that people have lived there since the 60s. You know. So
because ours are in Eastland, you know, that area's become same kind of similar things. There's a lot of nice houses in that area. Technically, people have been there for years.
Same thing with Cardinal Valley. Cardinal Valley has a lot of sketchy stuff going on in the front sometimes, and you go in the back, and it's little old ladies that have been there since '72. You know, so So we bought that duplex in Winburn, and when we walked into it, I looked at it one night after work with Dewanna, and I was a hard no on it because we walk in, and the entire back half of the roof on one of the units is gone. It's a side-by-side duplex, and it literally has a tree growing through it. The AC units are on the roof because even then in the early 2000s, people were stealing AC units over there and cycling them out for copper. So, and we walk through, and I fall through the floor. There's holes in the floor where it's just rotted. That literally, a 2x2 hole in the kitchen floor, and I
oh my gosh,
nearly break a leg, and it was rough. And I thought they wanted $28,000 per side was the number that I had in my head, because she said, "Oh, we're going to go look at it. It's $28,000, And I'm like, I'm not paying $60,000 for this piece of crap, and then spend the next 2 years over here busting my butt, worried about getting shot, because I can only work at night because I've got a job. So it's 5 o'clock. I'm going, 6 o'clock. I'm over there working, and I'm like, it's just not. And she's like, no, it's $28,000 for both sides, and I'm like, oh, what do they rent for over here? And she's like, from what I can tell, she called one of the signs because there was no real online central location. It's not like you can go to Renometer or Zillow.
That's a good point, yeah.
So it's kind of like, so she literally drove around the neighborhood and wrote down the signs that were for rent and called and said, how much for rent, how much for rent, how many bedrooms? And she had 5 or 6 that she'd found, and they were between $450 and $550 for a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. And so when you plug those numbers in, it's like, well, if we buy this thing for $28,000, let's say we spend $10,000 putting kitchens and floors and the roof in it, and it makes $900 a month. That's an easy yes. You're looking at a 3% house, and it's like that. So the numbers were just spectacular.
And which is crazy to think about rent, because I know the rent in that area for that is like double now.
Yeah. So we've still got it. Yeah. And so we managed to get that one with a HELOC. We had some cash, and then we had a HELOC that we'd opened up. So we bought it with no bank intervention at all. We didn't have a loan on it, technically. Yeah. And then we worked on it, did the work ourselves, got it up and running, and stuck it in the portfolio. And then it's like, okay, so now we're making pretty good money, cash flowing, a couple $1,000s a month out of these 4 houses. And I'm like, okay, this is awesome. And I get a haircut. My uncle owns a barbershop, or he did at the time, owned the barbershop over in Indian Hills, Indian Acres in Georgetown. And I'm sitting there getting my haircut and talking to him about, we just finished this house, in Winburn, and we're looking, for the next, and he's like, well, your other uncle has 4 little shotgun houses he wants to sell that he's getting too old to maintain or take care of, and he doesn't want to deal with the hassles of renters. And I was like, okay. So I called my Uncle Lewis up and I say, hey, Harold said you were looking to sell some houses. He goes, yeah, I'll meet you over there tomorrow. And so I was like, okay, awesome. So we go meet him, and he's in his mid-80s at the time. He was 84, 85.
And it's amazing the doors that just start opening sometimes with this.
Yeah.
You're like, I don't know where the next one's going to come from or something like that. So I assume you got those 4 then.
Yeah.
And so, what was that? I mean, did you start having a change of like, I'm going to start making this into our career?
That's what. When we looked at it, our initial goal was we were trying to get to about 10 paid off houses.
Okay.
So when we looked at the numbers, it's like, if we can get 10 of these things, making $500-ish, maybe $700 if they don't have mortgages a month, free and clear, that's our lifestyle. We don't need 1,000 houses. I don't need 500 doors. I don't need 100 doors. Yeah. It's like, what are things going to cost? What do I want to do? We're not extravagant people. We're very much, like I said, I've been poor, and I don't have a high level of, I'm not going buying Versace and Gucci. It's like I'm shopping at Walmart and Kohl's, and it's like.
Right. No, I mean, I guess that's a good point in some respects, as far as sometimes earlier on, it's just about trying to get as many properties as possible. But then there probably can be like that mind shift of like, all right, I want to get these paid down.
Right.
I don't necessarily need to just keep acquiring. Maybe now the goal is shifted to just getting these things paid down type of thing, which can therefore present more cash flow without having to do more acquiring. Yeah.
So it goes in cycles. Yeah. So we're in one of those cycles now. So we looked at that, and when we got to that 4th unit, it's like, okay, do we really need, how many do we need? And it's like, well, and all of this occurred from the house number 2 until house number 8. In less than a year. It was about 9 or 10 months. And it was basically, like you said, you put things out there in the universe and they return. So that's why I say, one of the big things is people know that you're a real estate investor, but do they know that you actually buy? Yeah. Or are you kicking around the edges, or are you a big talker? Or are you someone that says, you know what? Yeah, I'd like to see your house. Yeah. And then, okay, when can we close? That kind of thing. Oh, yeah. So we bought that, got the duplex online, talked to my uncle. We go and look at the houses. We take my mother-in-law, who is an incredibly risk-averse person. That's where, my wife learned it from. So we pull up, and it's on Caden Court, it's not even a street. It faces the back of a community center, the Carver Community Center, where Oliver Lewis Way is now. Mm-hmm. None of that existed. Carver Community Center was basically a dead-end street. Yeah. And there are 4 little shotgun houses that face the back of Carver Community Center. And so we pull up, and me, my mother-in-law, and my wife meet my uncle over there, and it's like a scene out of a movie like Boys in the Hood. You open the doors, and it's music playing out of the back of the community center, and there's a bunch of guys standing around with 40s in bags, drinking and shooting dice and smoking weed. And I'm standing there, and it's like, I grew up on the north side of Lexington. I'm comfortable. I'm a big guy. Nobody's, it's not an issue, right? My mother-in-law refuses to get out of the car, won't even get out of the car to go look at the houses. And my wife is like, you are insane if you think we're going to buy these houses. And so I'm like, well, Lewis is here. I don't want to waste his time, but I want to see the houses. If the numbers are right, I don't care where they are. So that was the mentality at the time. I was like, I just spent, money in Winburn. Why wouldn't I look over here? This is no worse than Winburn, and it's 2 blocks from downtown. It's a block off the corner of Maxwell and Broadway. Yeah. So you can walk to Rupp Arena. You can walk, So we go look at the houses, and they are 120 or 130-year-old shotgun houses that were built for the railroad employees when they were working on the railroads down there. Okay. It's in Davis Bottoms is the name of the neighborhood. And it was really rough. My uncle had actually taken them in payment about 15 years before for work that he had done for someone, and 2 of them didn't even have roofs. They were literally burned out shells. And so he had spent about a decade fixing up one house and renting it out and going to the next house, fixing it up and renting it out. So that was kind of his retirement plan. And he was in his mid-80s, and he just said, I'm tired of doing it. So he had gotten to 3 of the 4 houses, and the 4th house was still a crooked little shotgun house. And if people don't know what shotgun houses are, basically colloquially, they're small, less than 600 square feet houses that you can look through. They're 1 room wide, and they say that if you shoot a shotgun from the front door, the pellet spray will go out the back door without touching the walls, basically. They're very narrow, city lot, 0 lot lines, and they don't build them anymore. Yeah. So they're good rentals because they're cheap, used to be. Sure. So we go walk through these houses, and my uncle has basically rebuilt 3 of the 4. You know, 2 of them he absolutely had reframed, new roofs, metal roofs, and they looked great. One of them was decent. The 4th one he hadn't touched. So every door in the house is crooked and is leaning, 20 degrees off level, and they all had center chimneys in them. And the center chimneys tied into the floor structures, and over 120 years, they just sink straight into the ground. So it pulls everything into the middle of the house. So the doorway in one room will be short on the left side, and you go into the other room and it's short on the right side. So it's literally like walking in a carnival fun house. It's kind of freaky. But so I'm looking at these houses, and I'm like, well, Lewis, what do you want for these? And he's like, 75. I'm like, we can't pay $300,000 for these 4 houses, Lewis. He goes, no, $75,000 for all 4 of them. And my wheels start pinning. And I'm like, well, what do they rent for? And he's like, well, I get $500 and $450 and $400 and $350. And I'm like, damn. I add the numbers up, and I'm like,
you don't even have to think all the way through that to know. Like,
so it's not even. I don't even need a napkin for the back of the napkin math on this. It's like, okay. So what do we need? What do you want? And he's like, I'll tell you what. He's like, if you can give me $15,000, I'll finance the rest. The other 60.
Self-finance it, yeah.
So seller financing.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow. I was like, well, we've never done that. What do we need to do with that? So we go talk to the attorney that we talked to about my mother's house when, we were worried on the first purchase about Medicare, Medicaid coming after us because there's hiding assets basically was what we were worried about with hers because she was sick and she was taking advantage of the Medicare benefits. And we talked to an attorney, and the attorney said basically those are typically people hiding assets to qualify for Medicare.
Sure.
She's like, even though your mother owns that house free and clear, she still qualifies for Medicare. So she can do with her assets as she wishes.
And to that point, let's not go down that trail but just kind of touch on it, though, just more as far as we were kind of talking earlier, just as far as like getting your ducks in a row as far as that goes. I think we don't think about that as real estate or investors, but just touch on that of like just from self-experience of what we need to do.
So the big deal there is that we've talked about estate planning. You talk about your wills and how you want your things distributed when you die. Nobody was comfortable talking about that.
No.
But do it. I've had a couple of dealings with this recently. My sister passed away, and she didn't really own anything. She had a car that someone had gifted her. She lived in a rental property that we had for way under market rent. And we're 3 months in, and we still haven't closed out probate for her so that we can give the car away, which is what we're planning to do. Is we're going to donate it to.
God forbid you actually own real estate or multiple things real estate. It's just
that's something that people don't want to talk about, but people need to talk about. Is make your plan, and it can take as little as an hour to sit down, basically sign the paper, say here's what I want, here's who I want to have it. But they wouldn't let my sister sign a power of attorney document when she was in the hospital because she was under the influence of narcotics because of the treatments she was undergoing. So you want to do that well before you think you're going to need it, and you never know when you're going to need it. So go do it now.
It's so easy.
So we had dealt with some concerns about that. My mom was still in good mental health, so she was still fine with that. It was just the physical wear down that she was not going to be recovering from to come home for. So we talked to an estate attorney about that and about what we needed to do to make sure that we didn't spend $100,000 fixing this house, and then Medicare comes and says, hey, you guys got that fraudulently, and we're going to sell it at auction and reimburse the millions of dollars the medical bills that your mother had. So we dealt with that, and then we talked to the other attorney about the planning for sale by owner financing, and it was basically some minimum imputed tax rates that he has to cover basically as an owner, and we calculated those costs into the loan that he was going to have to us, and it was literally a few $1,000s because they're the government, they want their taste. So that's essentially what it boiled down to. So we were trying to figure out how are we going to get $15,000 because once again, we were making, $1,500, $1,800 a month on real estate, but we were just plowing that back down on mortgages because we thought that was the sure way to get money. And we never thought we'll be able to roll up at a big enough of a nut to buy houses. It's going to take years if we were only saving $1,500, We can't go buy a $50,000 house every 3 years if we do that. But so we were, reinvesting and paying down mortgage on the house on large. So we didn't have the cash. But what we did have was credit card cash advance checks. Which so like I said earlier, opportunity is out there. If you are willing to take it and take risk, I didn't have an issue with the risk. My wife I thought she was going to pass out when I suggested it. But I literally had received the checks a couple of days before that. So we went home that night after we talked about the numbers with my uncle. You know, he wanted 15, finance 60, you know, minimum interest rates. And it's like on a 10-year payoff. And it's like, well, that will leave us cash flowing over $1,000 out of those 4 houses. And we'll go from 4 houses to 8 houses.
Yeah.
We were looking at, we only need 10 paid off to do this. So in 10 years, these will all be paid off. That was the numbers that we were working with. It's like, we just need to buy 2 more houses and we're done, you know?
Yeah.
And that's, so it's kind of like, you know, you look at the ladder, it's like, where's the first step of the ladder? Is it down at, you know, eye level, or is it down at your foot level? And it's like, where do you put your foot, you know?
Yeah.
So I was like, that's how I looked at it. And so we called the credit card company that night and said, how long does this take? What are the terms? What are the agreements? And it was basically an interest-free loan for up to $20,000. You had to pay minimum transaction charges, which was like $275. And then the interest kicked in at month 13, day 1 of month 13. You don't see that nowadays. Everybody has figured out that was not a good deal for the credit card companies. So we essentially had $15,000 deposited into a bank account 3 days later for $275. And then I wrote the check to my uncle for $15,000 and bought those 4 houses.
That's awesome.
So we'd used a 96 Cavalier to buy a house. We'd used, credit card checks and cash advances to buy 4 houses. And it was kind of like, wow, I guess we're really doing this. We're investing in real estate. And so what we made our goal then was we stopped paying down on the mortgage that we had on Larch and made it our goal to pay off that $15,000 before we paid any interest on it, which was easy to do with the cash flow numbers that we now had. So we had it paid off on like month 10. So we never paid any more interest to the credit card company about that.
Yeah.
Does great for your credit score too. So, so we did that.
Because these were all being purchased just in your name.
Those 4, we set up our first LLC.
Okay.
So the first 4 houses we had were all in our personal name. Yeah. And then as we get a little more serious about this, we realize we're exposing ourselves to risk. Yeah. Especially with purchases in areas that are kind of sketchy. Somebody, something goes awry, we're going to be on the hook for this. And so we realized and started reading about, segmented LLCs and, we never got that deep. We did talk to some people about it and, they all have costs and transactional costs, and your buckets have to be clear. So you can't pierce the membranes between, your personal liability insurance and the company insurance. So we started talking to people, and we had a little group of friends that we were dealing with at the time that were also investing that were talking about, so we decided to set up just a single entity LLC and then purchase it as the container for these 4 houses. So they would be separate from what were our, personal homes.
Right.
And then, so we did that, and then we just moved forward purchasing after that.
Just kind of one after another. So jump all the way to just kind of,
so we had
where we're at today, or retiring.
So we had those 8
in that sense.
Yeah. So we had those 8, and then we set up a company with one of those people that we were talking about buying investments with, and we set up a partnership with them. And we named the company Recursive Realty because we planned to just spend the same money over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. So we were just priming the pump to feed a machine that was just going to spit cash out in the terms of cash flow. Yeah. So we took out 401k loans at that time to go and start up the seed money, essentially. Yeah. So we put $25,000 each in initially, but that wasn't enough. So we ended up putting in another 5. So we ended up with $60,000 as a fund money to go buy a house. And we bought a house in Castlewood over there for $48,000. Spent a summer with my friend and I working on it. We sanded and stained the hardwood floors. It needed all new doors and windows. We went in and gutted a bathroom. It was a 4-bedroom, 1 bath. Did all that work, got it up, and went to the bank as a new LLC and said, we want to use this as collateral and set up a line of credit. Yeah. And the banker said, okay, we'll go off the PVA value. Once again, different time, now they want appraisals that know. So he said, what's the PVA value on it? And we looked it up, and it was like $87,000. And he's like, okay, we'll give you $87,000. No questions asked. Right. And it was... So we took that, and it's like, well, we just got an $87,000 line of credit. Yeah. So we paid ourselves back the initial money, and then went and looked, and we found another house for the same price 2 blocks away, and bought it for the same $48,000. Did the same thing there, got it up and running, went back to the banker and said, hey, what can you do? He said, it's worth $88,000. Got our money, and then we literally, at that point, we just kept spending the same $60,000, and we bought 16 houses in about 9 months. Oh, wow. Doing that same thing. And then somewhere about house 3 or 4, we started hiring people sketchy Craigslist contractors. So don't do that.
Yeah.
Hire legit contractors, factor the cost in because you're going to pay them one way or the other.
Yep.
So
That's a great point right there,
You're going to pay for good work or you're going to pay for crappy work multiple times. So that's something that you learn after dealing with it. But so we got to 16 houses in that new LLC of Recursive Realty, had some strong philosophical differences about how things were going to proceed.
Okay.
And realized that they weren't on the same path that we were. So we ended up splitting the company. They took 8 houses. We took 8 houses, and we literally had to sit down and go through, and it was a nightmare. So that was one of the things that you talk about is when you partner up with people, it's great when the partnership is good and everybody is going in the same direction. But all it takes is one person to say, that's not the direction I want to go, to blow an entire partnership up. And that's what happened. So when you make your plan and you make your LLC and you make your articles of organization, you also need to say, how are we going to exit this?
Yeah, that's a great point there.
So you got to have an exit strategy in place. You do it for other investments. You do it for a house. You know, if you buy it as a flip and I can't flip it, what am I going to do? Turn it into a rental. It's going to be a short-term or long-term rental. Well, so you've got a whole factor, a decision tree you got to follow out. Do the
operation
same thing.
Agreement.
Absolutely. So your operating
I don't know if we've talked about that on this, but yeah, definitely have an operation agreement if there's a partnership that spells out everything, because you could be the best of friends or closest of brothers and you still need it written out in details as far as what that partnership looks like and what that exit looks like if there is a case or whatnot.
Absolutely. So that was where we were kind of like, okay, we don't need anybody else in this partnership. My wife and I are solid. We've been business partners. We've been friends before we were business partners, and now we're married and we have children, and we're not going anywhere. So that's the only relationship and partnership that I felt comfortable moving forward with. Yeah. At the time, you know, there are all of these opportunity costs. You know, I didn't have $60,000, so I couldn't have done it myself. Yeah. But in hindsight, you know, it was a good because it did accelerate. Right. We were buying in the bottom of the market.
Served a purpose for sure.
It definitely, you know, I feel like we probably looked at 150 houses. We probably should have bought 150 houses. We bought 10% of what we looked at because we were very selective. It's like, oh man, that one needs cabinets. Well, I'd go to the next one, you know. Oh, that one needed the floors refinished. Go to the next one, you know. But that's so being that type of person, it was just like, you know, I don't need somebody in my business if they aren't on the same page as me. Yeah. I couldn't guarantee. So that's why we just pressed forward ourselves. So we went from 8 to 24 in a partnership. We split it. We went back and went to 16 houses, and they were all, except for that duplex, all single family residences. Okay. The vast majority of them in Lexington. We did buy a few in Georgetown because we're in Georgetown. We bought one in Winchester because it was insanely cheap. Yep. And it's been a great producer. Nice. Winchester, I think, is somewhere that doesn't have a lot of attention right now. Right. And I'm thinking it should probably get a lot of attention because things are still there to be had for a good price. Yeah, yeah. I agree. So from that point, we went and just kind of plinked and plunked and, a single family here and there when the money was right or the numbers were right. And then my wife ran into someone at Lexmark Daycare who was discussing with a contractor on a phone how he had screwed up the rental property, blah, blah, blah. And my wife is totally not a forward person, but she actually went up and introduced herself and said, "Hey, I'm Dewanna. I heard you talking about rental property. Do you guys have rental property?" And it was totally out of her comfort zone. And he said, "Yeah, actually I do." He's like, and so they became friends. They had kids that were in the same daycare at Lexmark. Okay. So we became good friends with them and ended up, they had to pass on a deal because he was leaving Lexmark to go to another job. And they had been presented by one of his friends an opportunity to buy some multifamily units in Frankfurt. And his friend had said, "Here's what I offered, and I think this was a fair price." And then his name's Judd. Judd said, "Well, I can't really do it right now. I'm not in a position to do it, but I know some people that might be." So he kicked it to Dewanna and said, "Hey, you guys could go look at these. Here's the prices that they were talking about." Yeah. The guy is a tired landlord. He was actually a slumlord, but tired landlord. And he said, "I think the numbers there are going to be spectacular. I've got a couple in Frankfurt." And he said, he calls them cash cows. He's like, "They were cash cows. They just puke cash out there." So, and they were fourplexes and triplexes, and it was in a really bad neighborhood in Frankfurt. Yeah. But they make money. And so we went and looked at them, and we bought 16 doors out of that deal for pennies on the dollar because they were a tired landlord. And if it cost a nickel to fix, he didn't fix it. He had an on-site handyman that he told us at closing that you should really give him a shot because if you tell him to go hang somebody up by their toenails, he'll hang them up by their toenails. And I'm like, I don't think that's such a good endorsement as you think it is. So the handyman was living on site. His girlfriend was a drug user. He was a drug user. They lived in one of the basement units. It was just, so we buy the place and we don't have, we had to get all the estoppel agreements and all of that sorted out. And he won't sign the estoppel agreement. And then about 2 weeks after we close, his girlfriend OD'd in one of the basement units. And then he was in the wind. So that kind of solved itself short term.
Right.
But so we bought it in Frankfurt. We bought 16 multifamily doors down there in Frankfurt. And they have been spectacular in terms of performance. Okay. So we bought in. There are some other people in the group, in the Bluegrass Real Estate Investors Group, that also own in the same neighborhood. So we kind of were able to force multiply and we put property management in place. And people have to have background checks. People have to have, all of the processes that normal property management goes through, we put in place with a property management company because I didn't have the bandwidth and the time. I had a wife and a daughter and 26 other houses that I'm trying to, keep afloat. So we ran the pro forma numbers with the actual costs of property management in place. And we made the purchase based on, we think this is what's going to happen. And then realized, hey, Jim's got some houses in Frankfurt and Scott's got some houses in Frankfurt. And so we all ended up at the same property management company who now it's no longer the first person who shows up with $800 and a pit bull gets the place. It's going to be somebody that has a job, that has a background check, that has gone through the approval and vetting processes of a property management company. And so the whole neighborhood over there, we've been able to pretty close to double rents from what they were when we bought them about 7 years ago to where they are now. And they're still under market rents in terms of what people say it costs to live in Kentucky. Yeah. So, this house that was renting or this fourplex that was renting for $350 or $400 with utilities included is now renting for $750 or $800 a month with no utilities included. So there's lots of edges to work there to increase the profitability.
Well, that's cool. And that's a great story there as far as building out that, because obviously I think it was probably an easy transition into kind of retiring at that point.
So at that point, so that puts us up to where we're at today, which most of our recent purchases were in Frankfurt in multifamily, small multifamily. And then we had the whole COVID fiasco hit. Yeah. And
that's a whole another conversation. Man, I'm sure we can't do it today.
So.
I know.
But what came out of that was the realization that, we realized it's going to take more than 10 houses free and clear.
For sure.
Because you can't future-proof don't know what inflation's going to do. You don't know what things are going to cost in the future. What's healthcare going to cost? What's my kids' college going to cost? So we were kind of naive in the first batch of numbers. Yeah. And then we moved on to say, when we start looking at the numbers, here's where we need to be comfortable with. And it was this number of per month. Right. And then it was like, okay, well, now what can we take off of our plate so that I can say, I have one person I have to talk to. I don't have a tenant calling me and saying, hey, I need the HVAC guy, or hey, I need the electrician to come by, which I still have. I still self-manage probably 20 doors of single families, but they are literally all people that I've placed. None of them have been placed in the last 3 or 4 years. Okay, wow. So they're sticky on single-family homes. People stay. They've got kids. They've got a garage. They don't want to change schools. Multifamily stuff, people are like, hey, I got my tax money. I'm moving. This place is dirty now. I'm going to go get a new place. It's freshly clean and it has new floors. So those type of things happen on multifamilies no matter where they are. So that was one of the things we kind of factored in cost-wise. And then COVID hit, and it's like, well, I usually do open house showings myself, take applications, do the background checks. I don't want to be out in, when it first hit, 2.5 years ago. Yeah. So we turned it over to the property management company who we use, Kentucky Life Property Management with Josh Shepler. Yeah. I think you just had them on here. They're awesome. We love those guys. They take a lot off of our plate. We let them do the management. They place the tenants. We get a statement from them every month, and it's basically I reconcile that into my Excel spreadsheet because I'm still that guy.
Nothing wrong with that.
All right. So we do that, and then we just let them handle the hard stuff. Yeah. And then at some point, as we have vacancies, we go in, and the guys that I use, we do the turns. Yeah. We put them and say, here, Josh, back up, list this. It's ready to go. There you go. And then wash my hands of it and let them have it.
Let's go.
And then, so that's our plan now. And then, so we're looking at that as we've bled off, probably 10 or 12 houses to them over the past 2 years since COVID. And so that's awesome. Where we are.
Well, dude, that's awesome. That's a great story. And I guess to wrap it up here, I mean, I kind of always at least ask this question as far as Kentucky goes. I mean, kind of what's your favorite, being from here? If somebody wasn't from here, what were you typically saying, What do you love about Kentucky in that sense?
We've lived here our entire lives.
Yeah.
We love the Red River Gorge.
Yeah.
When we were not able to take real vacations the first 8 or 10 years, we would still sneak away and go. It's an hour, 10 hour and 15 minutes to get somewhere, park, hike, spend a day, spend a night. So it's something now that's getting national attention.
It really is.
It's going to explode if it hasn't already. So that's one of the things I regret is we didn't buy anything. And we talked about it early on, but it was one of those things where no VRBO, no Airbnb, it was no short-term rental, that kind of stuff just didn't exist really.
Right.
So it wasn't a market that we could expand into because we weren't, and that wasn't our deal, you know. So we were buying hold and long-term rentals. And,
that's definitely a different market for sure in that respect.
It's just been crazy.
Yeah.
We're going our 21st anniversary is next week, and
congrats! I just celebrated my 12th.
Awesome, congratulations. Yeah. We're going to go back to the gorge. And see what's going on. We went back for a day trip a few months ago, and it was just like, what happened?
Seriously.
My gosh,
No, it really has changed in just the last 5 years alone in that sense. A lot of cool cabins or cool places that kind of starting to pop up, more things to do outside of just the hiking as far as things. So, I appreciate you coming on the show. Again, everybody, check us back next week as far as anything goes for another episode of the Keys to Commonwealth podcast. And before we do go, Joe, is there any way if somebody wanted to kind of reach out, kind of just prick your brain as far as expertise and so forth like that? Yeah, I know we could keep going for sure on a lot of other topics. So we may have to have you back on one day for sure. But what's the best way to get a hold of you if you are so inclined?
Reach out to me, Caden Properties at gmail.com, CADEN. Properties@gmail.com, or I'm usually at the Bluegrass Real Estate Investors Group meetings. I think the next one is Thursday.
I wish I could get out to those more often than I can.
It's good. Yeah. It's good to be out with people that are doing things.
Yeah.
And you never know who you're going to meet.
Right.
There are people there that have thousands of doors. There are people there that had literally just decided, I'm going to go see what's going on.
Right.
I just can't imagine, if we had that type of resource, 20 years ago.
Sure.
How valuable that has been, I know
it's been hugely valuable for me just being in the short time we've been in and acquiring real estate.
Yeah, so that's where I'm there, and they've got a great group of admins out there. James Wilcox and Kristen McCoy and Jamie Nelson are the admin for the most part. They're awesome, and the wholesalers show up, the buyers show up. It's really somewhere to go and meet people that are doing these type of businesses.
That's awesome.
So.
Perfect. Well, I will see everybody here again for another episode next week. Make sure to subscribe. We appreciate you listening. And Joe, once again, thanks for coming on the show.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
To learn more about this podcast, visit our page at keystothecommonwealth.com. To connect with Landry regarding insuring your investment portfolio, email Landry at novainsuranceGroup.com or call 859-687-2004.